You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your Security Plus certification journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. Part 1. Risk assessments serve as the foundation for making informed security decisions. At their core, a risk assessment is the process of carefully examining assets, systems, or programs to determine where weaknesses exist and what could go wrong. Think of it like a doctor's checkup for your organization's technology. The goal is not only to find current health issues, but also to anticipate conditions that may arise in the future. The purpose is to evaluate vulnerabilities, the likelihood of threats exploiting those vulnerabilities, and the potential impact if that happens. Without this structured evaluation, organizations are essentially flying blind, reacting only after problems occur rather than preventing them. Before beginning any assessment, it is essential to define the scope. Scoping means deciding what will be included and what will be left out of the exercise. For example, you might choose to focus only on your customer-facing web applications rather than every system in your company. Scope also determines the time frame, such as assessing risks over the next 12 months versus a longer horizon, and which types of attackers or accidents you want to consider. If the scope is too broad, the assessment may become overwhelming and vague. If it is too narrow, you might overlook serious risks. Clear scoping helps focus resources and ensures findings are relevant. A meaningful risk assessment depends on a solid understanding of assets. An asset can be anything valuable to the organization, such as data, servers, applications, or even reputation. The first step is to identify what assets exist and then determine their relative value. For example, a public marketing website may be important but far less critical than a database containing customer financial information. Valuation does not always mean assigning a dollar figure. It can also be about ranking assets by importance to operations or compliance requirements. Without this groundwork, later steps in the risk assessment lack context. You cannot protect what you haven't clearly identified and valued. Next, we must turn to the threats facing those assets. A threat is any potential cause of harm, whether it comes from a malicious actor, an accident, or even natural events. Common categories include cybercriminals seeking financial gain, insiders making mistakes or abusing privileges, and environmental hazards such as fires or floods. Security teams often rely on threat intelligence, curated information about emerging attack trends, to enrich this step. For example, if intelligence reports show a spike in ransomware targeting healthcare systems, a hospital should include that in its assessment. By framing the likely sources of trouble, threat identification gives risk assessments practical direction. Identifying vulnerabilities is the next crucial step. Vulnerabilities are weaknesses in systems, processes, or configurations that a threat could exploit. There are several methods to discover them. Automated scanning tools can quickly detect missing patches or insecure settings. Architecture reviews allow experts to analyze how systems are designed and where flaws may exist. Interviews with staff often uncover risky practices, such as weak password habits, while configuration checks validate whether devices follow established security baselines. Combining these techniques paints a realistic picture of where the doors and windows of your digital house might be unlocked, giving threats opportunities to walk in. After cataloging vulnerabilities, the assessment shifts toward estimating likelihood. Likelihood asks, how probable is it that a particular threat will exploit a given vulnerability? Several factors inform this judgment. Historical data can reveal whether such events have happened before. Exposure levels indicate how visible the asset is to potential attackers. For example, an internet-facing server is more exposed than one deep inside a private network. Exploitability refers to how easy or difficult it would be for an attacker to succeed. Estimating likelihood blends quantitative evidence with expert judgment, producing a practical sense of probability that guides decision-making. Impact measurement complements likelihood estimation by answering the "so what" question. If an event occurs, what damage would result? Impact can take many forms: direct business process disruption, financial losses, regulatory fines, or harm to reputation. For example, a payment processor that suffers downtime may lose thousands of transactions per hour, while also damaging customer trust. Measuring impact often requires input from across the business, finance, legal, operations, and communications, because consequences ripple in different directions. By quantifying and qualifying impact, organizations can prioritize which risks deserve urgent attention versus those that can be tolerated. Once both likelihood and impact are estimated, the two are combined to create a risk rating. This often involves using a matrix that maps low to high likelihood against low to high impact, producing categories such as critical, moderate, or low. Risk ratings help decision-makers see which issues require immediate action and which can be managed over time. For example, a vulnerability with low likelihood but catastrophic impact may still be considered high risk because the potential damage is unacceptable. These ratings also establish thresholds that trigger action, ensuring resources are directed toward the most serious problems first. It is important to document assumptions and confidence levels throughout the process. Assessments are rarely perfect. They rely on data, expert opinion, and sometimes educated guesses. For example, if there is no clear data on how often a type of attack occurs, the team may assume once every 3 years based on limited reports. Similarly, if vulnerability scans only covered half the systems, confidence in the results should be labeled as partial. By clearly recording assumptions and confidence, others who review the assessment can understand its strengths and limitations rather than treating the results as absolute truth. Engaging stakeholders is another critical element of successful risk assessments. Stakeholders include system owners, business unit leaders, and subject matter experts who understand day-to-day operations. Their involvement ensures that assessments reflect reality rather than abstract guesses. For example, an IT administrator can explain how a system is actually used, while a finance manager can clarify the dollar impact of downtime. Engaging stakeholders also builds trust. When people feel included, they are more likely to support the recommendations that come out of the assessment. This collaboration transforms the exercise from a security-only activity into a business-wide effort. A good assessment must produce actionable findings, not just theoretical observations. Actionable findings describe what needs to be fixed, how much effort is likely required, and what priority it should carry. For instance, a recommendation might read, "Apply patch X on all customer database servers within 2 weeks. Estimated effort is 40 staff hours." By framing results in this way, stakeholders can plan remediation, allocate resources, and track progress. Without actionable output, assessments risk becoming shelfware, reports that look impressive but never influence real change. Actionability bridges the gap between analysis and improvement. To make the concepts tangible, one effective learning exercise is running a tabletop risk assessment. Imagine a company selects its payroll application for this activity. First, it identifies assets, employee records, financial data, and the payroll server itself. Next, it lists 5 threats and vulnerabilities: phishing emails, targeting payroll staff, weak access controls, outdated software, insider misuse, and accidental deletion of data. For each, likelihood and impact are estimated. Finally, 3 mitigations are proposed: enforce stronger authentication for payroll access, schedule regular patching, and assign clear data backup responsibilities. Each mitigation is given an owner to ensure accountability. Conducting such a tabletop exercise highlights how the steps of a risk assessment connect in practice. It demonstrates the value of systematically moving from assets to threats, vulnerabilities, likelihood, and impact, and then producing practical mitigations. This kind of scenario not only builds skills, but also shows how the process adds real business value. Learners begin to see that risk assessments are not abstract paperwork, but structured conversations that reveal where organizations are vulnerable and how to protect themselves. Even a simplified exercise makes the discipline less intimidating and more relevant to everyday decision-making. By the end of Part 1, The learner should see risk assessment as both an analytical and collaborative process. It requires identifying what matters, understanding who or what threatens it, and evaluating the chances and consequences of bad outcomes. Most importantly, it translates these insights into concrete, prioritized actions. This journey mirrors how professionals approach security in real organizations, structured, evidence-informed, and tied to practical improvements. With these foundations in place, we can now turn in Part 2 to advanced techniques that refine assessments, handle uncertainty, and embed the results into long-term organizational planning. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Facilitating a risk assessment is as much about managing people as it is about analyzing data. A facilitator must guide the group discussion so that it stays focused and does not become sidetracked by unrelated issues. One common challenge is anchoring, where the first opinion voiced heavily influences everyone else's judgment. For example, if one participant declares a threat as extremely likely, others may hesitate to disagree. Skilled facilitators encourage multiple viewpoints, ask clarifying questions, and remind the group of agreed definitions. This helps balance perspectives and ensures that the assessment reflects collective wisdom rather than the loudest voice in the room. To make assessments repeatable and auditable, organizations often rely on standardized checklists and templates. These tools ensure that each assessment covers the same critical areas, which improves consistency across projects or business units. For example, a checklist might remind the team to examine user authentication practices, network segmentation, and backup strategies. Templates help structure findings into clear categories, such as vulnerabilities, likelihood, impact, and recommended mitigations. This reduces the risk of forgetting important considerations and makes it easier for others to understand and compare results later. Consistency also supports compliance with frameworks and industry standards. Evidence collection is another cornerstone of credibility in risk assessments. Instead of basing findings solely on assumptions, teams gather concrete data such as system configurations, log files, vulnerability scan results, and interview notes from staff. For instance, reviewing server logs may reveal repeated unauthorized access attempts, while interviews with employees could uncover workarounds that bypass established controls. Collecting evidence builds confidence in the assessment and allows future reviewers to trace conclusions back to their sources. Without evidence, findings may be dismissed as speculation, weakening the case for remediation and undermining trust in the assessment process. Once evidence is gathered, scoring models are often used to transform qualitative judgments into structured outputs. Numeric scales, such as rating likelihood from 1 to 5, create a sense of comparability across risks. Heat maps visually display risks by plotting likelihood against impact, making it easy to see which threats land in the red zone of high concern. Some organizations use composite scoring approaches that factor in additional variables like detectability or recovery time. These models provide a common language for discussing risk and help decision-makers prioritize remediation efforts by seeing the risks ranked side by side. Dealing with uncertainty is an unavoidable reality. Even with the best data, there are always gaps and unknowns. Sensitivity analysis helps address this by testing how results would change under different assumptions. For example, if the likelihood of a phishing attack is uncertain, the team may explore scenarios where it occurs twice as often or half as often. Documenting alternate scenarios ensures that decision-makers understand the range of possible outcomes rather than relying on a single-point estimate. This transparency builds credibility, as it acknowledges that no assessment can predict the future with perfect accuracy. Follow-up activities are where risk assessments translate into action. Once findings are documented, organizations must create remediation plans that assign responsibilities, set timelines, and define verification steps. For instance, if a vulnerability is discovered in a payment system, the remediation plan might require the IT team to apply patches within 14 days, followed by a test to to confirm success. Verification is critical because fixes can fail or be incomplete. By planning follow-up steps, the assessment becomes a living process that drives improvements rather than a static report filed away in a cabinet. Some assessment outcomes demand immediate escalation. If a finding exceeds the organization's defined risk appetite, leaders must be informed quickly rather than waiting for routine reporting cycles. Imagine discovering that customer data is being transmitted without encryption. This is far beyond most organizations' tolerance for risk and requires immediate action. Escalation channels must be clearly defined so teams know whom to contact and how quickly. This ensures that unacceptable risks are addressed swiftly, protecting both the organization and its stakeholders from potentially severe consequences that could arise from delayed response. Integrating risk assessment outputs into project planning and budgeting cycles ensures that security considerations are not treated as afterthoughts. For example, if an assessment identifies the need for stronger access controls, the cost of implementing multi-factor authentication should be factored into the upcoming budget. Likewise, project managers should build remediation tasks into their schedules. By weaving findings into organizational planning, risk assessments influence real-world priorities and resource allocations. This integration reinforces the message that managing risk is not a separate activity, but a core component of business strategy and operations. Risk assessments are not one-time events. They must be repeated periodically and triggered by changes in circumstances. Major system upgrades, incidents such as data breaches, or new regulations are common reasons for reassessment. For example, if a company adopts cloud services for the first time, the risk profile changes significantly, demanding a fresh look at threats and vulnerabilities. Regular reassessments keep the organization's understanding of its risks current and relevant. Otherwise, yesterday's findings may provide false confidence, while new exposures quietly emerge unnoticed in the background. Communicating findings effectively is often the difference between action and neglect. Non-technical stakeholders, such as executives or board members, may not understand security jargon. Instead, they need results framed in business terms. For example, rather than saying, "There is a vulnerability in Protocol X," it is better to explain, "If exploited, this issue could cause an outage costing $100,000 per day." Visuals such as charts or heat maps can help make complex assessments understandable at a glance. Clear, business-oriented communication ensures that decision-makers grasp the significance of risks and support remediation. Maintaining an assessment repository creates a valuable knowledge base for the organization. Over time, the repository captures recurring risk drivers, common vulnerabilities, and effective mitigation strategies. Analysts can look back at past assessments to identify patterns, such as repeated misconfigurations or frequent phishing attempts. This trend analysis allows the organization to address systemic issues rather than treating symptoms in isolation. For example, if weak password practices appear in multiple assessments, it may signal a need for broader cultural change or stronger technical controls. The repository thus becomes an engine for continuous improvement. Ultimately, effective risk assessments are defined by a few essential qualities. They are scoped appropriately so that efforts remain focused. They are evidence-based, relying on data rather than guesswork. They are repeatable and structured, which supports credibility and accountability. Most importantly, they are tied to concrete remediation actions with clearly assigned owners. Without these elements, risk assessments risk becoming academic exercises that do not improve security. When done properly, they provide organizations with a roadmap to reduce exposure, strengthen defenses, and align security with business goals in a practical, measurable way. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.